Here's the chairman's mic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Mic check. Since I'm here. Ranking member mic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Witness table. 1, 2, 3. Witness table. Check, check, check. Witness table.
Good morning, everyone. The subcommittee will now come to order. As we head into Memorial Day, I'm looking forward to this legislative hearing and these pieces of policy meant to improve upon the lives of those who have raised their right hand to serve our country. I want to thank all of you for joining us today to discuss 6 very important pieces of legislation pending before the subcommittee with the intentions of benefiting, obviously, the lives of our heroes, our service members, our veterans, and their families. The bills brought forth by our colleagues today would improve the services and economic opportunities for our veterans and would make changes to the Service Member Civil Relief Act for when reservists and National Guardsmen are called upon to serve when a service member dies in the line of duty, and the subsequent effects to their surviving spouse in terms of their housing lease. We'll also make necessary reforms to the vocational rehabilitation and employment program to ensure that all of those who have served and are eligible for the program are able to reap the benefits from the program. I will let our colleagues who introduced these pieces of legislation discuss their bills in greater detail, but I do want to briefly discuss my bill, and I hesitate to say my bill because Chairman Winstrup, or former Chairman Winstrup, and the ranking member and so many others have contributed to this. So I'd say our bill that's on the agenda that we introduced, and it's one for me that's, when I think about all the money we invest to make our fellow citizens part of the greatest fighting machine the world has ever known, and to make them warriors, and then when they come back and they assimilate back into our society as civilians after active duty, I mean, what small amount of resource, time, and effort we spend in that process. So I can't think of a more important reform or policy to focus on than the Transition Assistance Program. My bill, or our bill, the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer William Bill Mulder Transition Improvement Act of 2018, is named in memory of my high school friend who was a decorated Navy SEAL. Bill was a true American hero who returned after his service to an internal struggle based on the mental and physical toll that his active duty took on him that unfortunately our men and women in uniform understand all too well. This bill would overhaul the service members' transition from active duty service to civilian life. It would improve upon each touch point in the service members' transition with the interagency efforts of the Department of Defense, Labor, Veterans Affairs, and their partner agencies who are also engaged in this effort. While there have been improvements over the years to the TAP program, more needs to be done to engage the service members earlier prior to their separation and to improve that warm handover, as we call it, from active duty to veteran status with the involvement of both federal entities and community programs that understand the needs of the veteran at the local level when they return home. This bill is another step towards reducing the struggles of unemployment, homelessness, suicide when those who have worn the uniform return home. We owe it to Bill and to all of our military who do everything we can to properly equip them for civilian life, just as we have equipped them for their military careers. As I have said since day one, as we work to develop this legislative package, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of intervention, and I'm thankful to all of my colleagues who played a role in creating this bill. I also want to thank the federal agencies, community programs, and other veterans stakeholders who were involved along the way. I look forward to discussing all of the bills before us today. I appreciate again the members on both sides of the aisle who are attending today to testify on their bills. I will now yield to my friend and ranking member, Mr. O'Rourke, for any opening comments he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll share with you something that I share with my constituents when they're looking for some encouragement in their government in some very tough and trying times for many. I tell them about this committee and the fact that just about any issue that we work on is done on a bipartisan basis. There's no Republican or Democratic bill to increase access for mental health care for veterans, to improve the Transition Assistance Program, to fulfill our commitment, our end of the bargain for those who put their lives on the line for this country. Legislation that just passed last week in the House of Representatives that made significant changes to a number of programs, including the caregiver program, to ensure parity for pre- and post 9/11 veterans and their family members who care for them really makes me proud. And it's something that it's not sensational or provocative enough, so it doesn't make the headlines, doesn't grab everyone's attention. But it's a story that needs to be shared because there is work being done. And the members who are about to testify and share the bills that they've worked on with their staffs are part of that story. And having reviewed these bills with our team, very encouraged by what's being brought forward, and look forward to supporting it and getting a little bit more information from the members who put them together. Lastly, I'll tell you that you've just been exceptional in your leadership on this transition assistance program. You held a field hearing in West Texas at Texas Tech in Lubbock. Texas Tech has become a leader in this, trying to define the example of how you successfully integrate people after they have served. And Dr. Wenstrup has been incredibly powerful and eloquent on this need to have purpose and fulfillment in your life after you come back from battle or combat or service. And through an education, through a career, through knowing what you're going to do next, which this TAP program can be so effective in, I think we can do far better for those who've served this country. So very grateful to be working on this committee with you and the other colleagues here. Grateful for those not on the committee who are about to testify and share their ideas for bills, and look forward to supporting them. And with the chairman's help, Chairman Rowe and the ranking member Walls, getting these on the floor as quickly as possible so we can continue to move forward. So thanks for bringing this hearing together. Look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Yield back.
Well said, and I agree, and I knew when they announced that I was going to serve with the ranking member from the great state of Texas, we were going to do some great things. That's a joke, but not a joke, but a joke. Let me now recognize our colleagues at the table. I will, but before we do that, actually, let's yield to our fellow committee members who also have bills on the agenda. Ms. Brownlee, thank you for being here and for your interest and for your legislation. We'll begin with you to discuss H.R. 5452. And you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member O'Rourke and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of my bill, H.R. 5452, the Reduce Unemployment for Veterans of All Ages Act. I appreciate the subcommittee's commitment to improving the VA's various veteran employment programs, including the Transition Assistance Program and the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. These programs provide the wraparound support, education, and services that help veterans get and keep meaningful work after their service. As a proud member of this committee and a co-chair of the Reinvesting in Our Returning Heroes Task Force, I share that same mission. My bill today makes one simple but powerful change to the VA's Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Program, also known as Chapter 31. As you know, the VA currently runs the Chapter 31 program to help veterans obtain employment and achieve maximum independence through job training, employment accommodations, resume development, and job-seeking skills coaching. In fiscal year 2016, nearly 30,000 veterans developed a new plan of service through vocational rehabilitation, and 11,500 veterans secured and maintained suitable employment or completed an independent living program. Eligibility for this program, however, expires 12 years after separating from military service. Not all veterans with service-connected disabilities are aware of their possible eligibility when separating from their service, and some may not need VRNE until later in their career. According to DAV Resolution number 250, not all disabled veterans are under the impression that they need vocational rehabilitation until later, after the current 12-year rule excludes them from the benefit that they need and would otherwise have been entitled to. The fact is, we need to address veteran unemployment at all ages and ensure America's heroes have the support they need in the 21st century economy. Currently, 60% of unemployed veterans, more than 270,000 former service members, are over the age of 45. older veterans have outstanding experience and technical skills, and we need to do more to help these veterans succeed in the labor market. This unfair cap on Chapter 31 harms the ability of older veterans to access employment services. This bill would lift this arbitrary limit and ensure veterans get the support they have earned and deserve. Like the caregiver program, this arbitrary cap forces the VA to treat two veterans who have the same service-connected disability differently simply because of how long ago they served. We worked in a bipartisan way to fix that unfairness in the caregiver program, and we should do the same here with Chapter 31. H.R. 5452 is supported by the VSOs as a common-sense solution to simplify the program and help get more veterans back to work. So I thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing. Unfortunately, I have to go to a markup and T&I, and we'll have to leave you, but I appreciate your focus and attention on all of the bills before us today and your efforts to make all of our veterans successful in the workplace. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Thank you for your leadership on the committee and your commitment to our veterans. Before I yield to our colleague, Mr. Peters, I'd like to say that we are fortunate and blessed to have our chairman with us at this legislative hearing, and I'd just like to ask if you had anything. So I just yield as much time as you may need, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't need a lot of time. And Mr. O'Rourke, thank you for letting me be here today. But I have a special guest I'd like to introduce, and I'd like to ask Molly Hale, if Molly would stand up. She's back over here. Molly is on Capitol Hill today working or representing, and I see another maybe person that's also doing that here, Youth Foster Day. And what we have are foster youth who have really had a tough time and been placed in foster care. And I don't know how anybody would pick me for a mentor, but anyway, she got the short straw, Molly did today. She is, and she'll be with us, and they have a luncheon later today. And I think, are you with, yeah, why don't you stand up also? I don't know your name, but these young people have overcome tremendous obstacles in their lives and really are amazing young people. And Molly has lost both of her parents and was in foster care. She's now finished her first year of college at East Tennessee State University. I think she had 38 semester hours first year, which kind of overwhelmed me to have that many, and is doing a great job. And I just wanted to give a shout out to both these young people here today. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Yeah. We're delighted that you're here with us, and we're very proud of you, and we'll see if you can suffer through a legislative hearing and test your patience. Yeah. And your. Let's now ask our colleague, Mr. Peters, to discuss his bill, H.R. 5538. Mr. Peters, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we certainly welcome the guests today. I appreciate your allowing me to testify today for my bill, the Reserve Component Vocational Rehabilitation Parity Act. Let me thank first General Jack Bergman, who joined me to introduce this bill, and 5 of our committee colleagues who's co-sponsored the bill. And I also want to thank the committee staff, who always does great work as well. So many guardsmen and reservists have realized they don't qualify for all their benefits since the Department of Defense began using their new authority to call up reserve components for involuntary service. The new authority unintentionally excluded these guardsmen and reservists in a way in which I will talk about. Thankfully, Ranking Member Walz and Mr. Palazzo have taken the lead to secure benefits for them, and we passed a few important fixes in the Forever GI Bill last year. One unresolved issue is access to vocational rehabilitation. So this VA program provides critical job training that helps service members and veterans find their career path after they've completed their service. Upon separation, there's a rule that veterans need to use their vocational rehab benefits within 12 years. They need the time to consider when and whether to take advantage of that benefit. But on separation from active duty, as you know, reservists can be called to spend some of those months or years deployed. So currently, 2 reservists serving side by side in active duty may not have access to the same amount of time to take advantage of the benefits, because the reservists who volunteered under current law to serve will have the vocational rehab benefit time, the 12-year, extended while they're deployed. But the reservist who is involuntarily deployed does not get that extension. So it's really a distinction with no reason. It's a simple fix. The guardsmen and reservists who served honorably in missions to support combat zones, they've provided the same service, they've earned the same employment, education benefits as any other reservists through their service. There's no reason to create a distinction between those who volunteers and those who were called on involuntarily. So my bill would just ensure reservists and guardsmen will have access to that full 12-year window to use their vocational rehab benefits. Proud that the bill, it's a simple bill, it's supported by the National Guard Association of the United States and the Reserve Officers Association. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that their letters of support be added to the record.
No objection?
I also want to commend my colleague, Ms. Brownlee, for her work to ensure veterans of all ages have access to vocational rehab in the future. But in the meantime, this bill provides some certainty for the guardsmen and reservists who need this fix now. I appreciate your attention today. I hope you will support the legislation and yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Peters, again for your leadership on the committee and your passion for serving our veterans. And now we'll turn to our attention to our panelists. It's an honor to be joined at the table by our colleagues, Dr. Winstrup of Ohio, Ms. Bustos of Illinois, and Mr. Costello from Pennsylvania. Thank you all for being here, and we will recognize each of you for 5 minutes to talk about your respective bills. Dr. Winstrup, we're going to miss you on the committee. Congratulations. I know your heart will always be with our veterans, and you'll always be working with this committee, and we need you over there at Ways and Means. So we'll begin with you. Mr. Winstrup, you're recognized now for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say from sitting down here, it looks a little different. You all look so big up there, I'm telling you. And but I see that I am replaced ably and deservingly by an outstanding veteran, Brian Mast. But I also want to say what a privilege it's been to be on this committee for 6 years and to serve under Chairman Rowe and to serve with each and every one of you. What you said before, Mr. O'Rourke, is very true. This committee gets a lot of things done and works very well together, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate the staff that I've had the honor to serve with as well. But I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding, and thank this committee for the opportunity to testify today on an important piece of legislation. One of the most important things Congress can do to help returning service members reintegrate back into civilian life is to support and prioritize programs that help them find meaningful employment or education and training opportunities. Unfortunately, the structure of the VA can detract and distract from this mission. Currently, the Veterans Benefit Administration is responsible for all benefits, of which the bulk of resources and attentions go towards disability compensation, pension claims, and the backlog that they face. The primary focus on these benefits has resulted, I believe unintentionally, in a lack of attention on other benefits, and especially those surrounding economic opportunity. That's why just last month, Representative Mark Takano and I introduced the Veterans Education, Transition, and Opportunity Prioritization Plan, known as VET-OP Act of 2018. This bill would create Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration at VA, headed by a new Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity and Transition. Under the bill, all the VA's education and training, transition, home loan, and veterans-owned and operated small business verifications would be placed under the new Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration. It's important to note that the bill would require this new administration to be created within existing resources to avoid growing government or adding new bureaucracy at VA. This is an opportunity to shift focus, to make a difference in our veterans' lives, and to make economic opportunity programs that empower our veterans more effective. For decades, the VA has prioritized other benefits and services at the expense of these programs that empower our veterans to successfully transition and continue to be self-sustainable. This bill is about highlighting economic opportunity programs and elevating them to a higher level, a level I believe they deserve. Our veterans return from war with skills that are applicable to the civilian world. They're strong, dependable leaders, and our commitment to programs that promote opportunities and success reinforces those abilities. The 1% of Americans defending our freedom deserve a solid path after service, one that comes with high-quality education and employment opportunities. And this bill furthers that mission. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Winstrup. Now, Ms. Bustos, we recognize you for 5 minutes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. And I really like how you started out this meeting by talking about bipartisanship. That is, we need obviously a lot more of that. And I'm proud with the fact that what I'm going to be talking about is bipartisan with this gentleman right here, a colonel, a doctor, and a member of Congress. And we are here to offer bipartisan legislation to support widows and widowers of our fallen heroes by allowing them to terminate residential leases without penalty in the wake of a service member's death. This is how I became aware of this issue. We have a woman who lives in Farmington, Illinois, which is in my congressional district, named Kylie Riney. Her life and her family's lives were forever changed on October 19th of 2016 when her husband, Douglas Riney, who was a sergeant in the military, tragically died when he was defending our freedoms in Kabul, Afghanistan. Kylie and her 2 little kids, James and Ella, were living in Texas at the time because Sergeant Riney's assignment was in Fort Hood before he deployed to Operation Freedom Sentinel. After her husband's death, Kylie chose to move back to her home state of Illinois to be surrounded by her family as they were mourning this inconceivable loss. But in the wake of this tragedy, their landlord refused to allow Kylie to terminate the lease that she and her husband had signed. Unbelievable. The families of our fallen heroes have already sacrificed far too much, and we should be doing everything in our power to ensure that grieving spouses receive the support that they need. For this reason, I was proud to introduce this common sense bipartisan bill that we call the Gold Star Spouses Leasing Relief Act. And I am proud that we were able to do this together with Congressman Winstrup. Currently, the Service Members Civil Relief Act protects service members from lease termination fees when they deploy or receive a permanent change of station. Our legislation very narrowly extends this law's residential leasing protections in order to protect the surviving spouses of service members who are killed while serving. So that's what this part of it does. Spouses of service members are already protected under several sections of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, including the sections on land rights, taxes, and voter registration. This bill would not dramatically expand this law. It would simply make sure that it is there for surviving spouses when they need it most. I can hardly think of anything worse than taking advantage of a grieving widow whose spouse made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. So I really do hope that we can pass this common sense legislation to ensure this does not happen again. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you, Ms. Bustos. We appreciate you and identifying a gap in supporting families, especially surviving spouses of service members. So bless you for that. And now we'll ask Mr. Costello to talk about his bill. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the inception of my comments, I just want to echo what Mr. O'Rourke said about this committee, which I had the distinction of serving on in my first term, as a committee that you can go home to your district and share with your constituents that you're doing good things in a bipartisan fashion and the politics doesn't make its way into here. And with Chairman Miller departing, I see that Chairman Rowe has filled ably in furthering that attitude and spirit and reputation of this committee. And I applaud all those who have bills here to be discussed this morning. I would like to speak on behalf of my legislation, H.R. 2409, which would eliminate unnecessary burdens on service members and their families during a change of duty or deployment. This is a bipartisan bill that would offer service members the flexibility to terminate pay, TV, or internet contracts while deployed. Under these unique circumstances, we can agree that men and women who serve should not have to navigate costly and time-consuming and oftentimes very, very annoying cancellation fees and policies. By updating the Service Members Civil Relief Act, service members would be able to end pay TV and internet service contracts without incurring early termination fees when they have military orders to move or deploy. It is important to note that there are similar relief provisions in some states, and certain businesses do voluntarily waive early termination fees. This legislation would enact a federal solution so that all our nation's service members and their families are provided uniform assistance. We all agree that the men and women who sacrifice so much to serve our country deserve the best possible service when they come home and when they are preparing to deploy. That is why I introduced this legislation. I would also just like to remark in closing, when I discussed Chairman Rowe and his tenure as chairman, and also that extends to the staff here, council and committee staff who do an excellent job. They should be applauded for their hard work. I know that my colleagues regularly do point them out, and I just wanted to do that as well, because we are all in this together. I think this committee really is the shining star on the hill, or however that term goes, in terms of demonstrating how Congress should work. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about supporting H.R. 2409 and yield back.
Mr. Costello, again, thank you for your leadership and service on this committee and your commitment to our veterans, and thank you for your time and for coming here today. You're now excused as we recognize the second panel of witnesses today. I want to welcome Ms. Margarita Devlin, Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Benefits at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr. John Kamen, Assistant Director for the Veterans Employment and Education Division of the American Legion, Ms. Lauren Augustine, Vice President of Government Affairs at Student Veterans of America, and Ms. Rebecca Burgess, Program Manager for the Program on American Citizenship at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you all for being here, and each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Devlin, let's start with you.
Good morning, Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here to talk about the views the Department of Veterans Affairs has on pending legislation, including H.R. 2409, H.R. 5452, H.R. 5538, H.R. 5644, H.R. 5649, and a bill authorizing lease termination under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. VA supports 5538, which amends Chapter 38 to provide the inclusion of additional periods of active duty service for charges to veterans' entitlement during periods of postponed participation in VRNE programs. We support this bill because it would ensure that members of the reserve component who are involuntarily activated receive the same benefits and protections as other individuals who are involuntarily activated. H.R. 5644 would establish the Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration, or VEOTA, to administer programs that provide assistance related to economic opportunity for veterans and their dependents and survivors. VEOTA would be responsible for the following VA programs: vocational rehabilitation and employment, educational assistance, veterans home loan programs, verification of small businesses owned and controlled by veterans, including the administration of the database of veteran-owned businesses, the Transition Assistance Program, and any other programs deemed appropriate by VA. While VA appreciates the committee's focus on improving services and resources offered by these programs, we do not support this bill. The current VBA structure appropriately reflects the Undersecretary for Benefits' overall responsibility for veterans' benefit programs that include programs related to economic opportunity and transition, as well as compensation, pension, survivor benefits, and insurance. VA is in the process of modernizing the entire organization. To achieve modernization, VA recognizes that the department must fundamentally change the way it operates. This requires the delayering of oversight offices and concentrating resources on frontline, veteran-facing, and veteran-serving positions. The addition of another administration would increase oversight for programs that are currently in place, contrary to the modernization efforts that are underway. H.R. 5649 would seek to improve transition assistance to service members and veterans under the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP, through improved private-public partnerships, authorization of studies, and other changes. VA appreciates the subcommittee's interest in TAP and shares its desire to make sure the program serves as many transitioning service members as possible and as effectively as possible. To that end, the interagency TAP team has currently initiated several evaluations and studies which will provide additional information needed to make evidence-based decisions on what we should do to make improvements and how those improvements should be made. We look forward to working with you in the subcommittee on improving TAP once we've completed these evaluations that are already in progress so that we can make evidence-based decisions. With respect to H.R. 5452, VA supports the objectives of this bill, which are designed to reduce unemployment for veterans of all ages. However, we cannot support this bill because we do not consider it necessary. Currently, Title 38 requires that VRNE benefits and services must be utilized within 12 years. This is true. However, other sections of Title 38 and VA regulations authorize the extension of this eligibility period for veterans for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to medical conditions, character of discharge, not having had a service-connected disability rating during that time period, and other reasons. There are many exclusions which allow us to extend that time period. In addition, the ETD may be waived as needed for veterans who are determined to have a serious employment handicap. Because we have all of these protections in place to help those veterans who are past their 12-year eligibility period but have rehabilitation needs, we believe we are already working to accomplish the goals of this bill. With respect to H.R. 2409, VA defers to DOD or DOJ on the draft lease termination bill because these bills fall outside of VA's jurisdiction. Thank you, Chairman Arrington and Ranking Member O'Rourke, for the opportunity to present our views on these bills. And this concludes my testimony, and I look forward to engaging in conversation as you have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Devlin. Mr. Kamen, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. On behalf of National Commander Denise Rohan and the 2 million members of the American Legion, we thank you for the opportunity to testify on these bills. Due to the allotted time available, I will briefly speak on 2 pieces of legislation and conclude with remarks on a recent change to GI Bill eligibility that may affect the educational opportunity of thousands of veterans. We will begin with H.R. 5649, the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer William Mulder Transition Improvement Act of 2018. H.R. 5649 marks a strong improvement of TAP, the largest reorganization of which since 2011. Specifically, this bill would restructure TAP to allow service members to choose specific career-oriented tracks that best suit their post-service plans, and would require that service members take part in one-on-one counseling prior to separation. It would also authorize a 5-year pilot program that would provide matching grant funds to community providers that offer wraparound transition services to veterans and transitioning service members. Specifically, the American Legion is pleased to see that language from H.R. 4835 has been included in this bill. In 2012, the American Legion helped push the off-base transition training pilot program that would extend the TAP programs to veterans and their spouses in a community-based setting. Overall course ratings by participants were high. However, the pilot program expired in January of 2015. We look forward to seeing it relaunched. Next, we move on to H.R. 5644, the Veterans Education, Transition, and Opportunity Prioritization Plan. The American Legion's National Executive Committee has recently examined this issue and determined that the proposal is of such historical magnitude that the appropriate course of action is to present it to our national convention this summer after careful study and consideration. This prudency is warranted, at the very least for us to present our concerns directly to the Department of Veterans Affairs. As to the nature of these concerns, one needs to look no further back than this subcommittee's vocational rehabilitation hearing last week. In this hearing, VA senior staff explained rather candidly that a $12 million contract to update VRNE's IT was botched. That happens. What they could not identify or explain under considerable duress was any party's responsibility for the error. This is not the fault of the VA staffers who bore the brunt of these questions, but it is telling evidence of systemic and structural barriers to effective governance. The American Enterprise Institute has made a passionate case for the necessity of a fourth administration in its recently released report. But further questions certainly need to be answered. Who is our champion? What will be the implications on how to untangle the web of IT issues affecting vocational rehabilitation and education, and how will this affect long-term budgeting? These questions warrant continued discussion and analysis. But the central question, upon which the future of the VA will pivot, is whether or not investing in the economic opportunity of veterans is a Tier 1 priority for the VA. If so, who is communicating these issues to the Secretary? Who can inform the Secretary of these issues with voc rehab? Who is making policy determinations on the practice of VA home loan mortgage churning? Who can share with the Secretary the success of the GI Bill and perhaps explain that it should not be the responsibility of the student veterans of America to foot the bill for research proving this success? Who can share with the Secretary the optimism that America is preparing its veterans to be future leaders and pledge that every investment made in them is meticulously calibrated to account for the volatile developments in housing, education, and employment markets? The irony is that this issue demands nothing more than the VA believe as strongly in the future of these veterans as the rest of the country does. The VA we want is the VA that recognizes that veterans are more than health, benefits, and cemeteries. The VA may have a plan for how this could be realized without a fourth administration, and to that end, we welcome their response. In closing, I ask for this subcommittee's indulgence in explaining a positive development on the subject of GI Bill eligibility. Up until 2 weeks ago, it had been the American Legion's understanding that the only way to secure post-9/11 GI Bill eligibility for Army reservists was active duty deployments. Then we discovered, with the help of our friends at the Enlisted National Guard Association, a document published by Army Human Resources Command titled MILPER 17-059. This message declared a change in interpretation of service qualifying for the post-9/11 GI Bill to include active duty training under 12301D orders. While this is exciting news to share, I cannot tell you how a reserve service member would become aware of this eligibility without rifling through U.S. code and DoD regulations. We have to do a better job about disseminating this information to our reserve service members, the Department of Defense, the VA, and yes, even the American Legion and our fellow VSOs. We usually end testimony by saying you can always count on the Legion for support. However, today we are calling for your support, encouraging the VA and the Department of Defense to raise awareness of this eligibility to support these often neglected service members. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kamen. Ms. Augustine, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Student Veterans of America to submit our testimony on the pending legislation before you today. With over 1,500 chapters representing more than 700,000 student veterans in schools across the country, we are pleased to share the perspective of those directly impacted by the subjects of transition and economic opportunity before you today. SVA strongly supports H.R. 5644, the VET Op Act, which would create the Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration at the Department of Veterans Affairs. We applaud this committee for considering such a proactive change to VA's current bureaucratic structure, which would truly prioritize empowerment, education, and economic opportunity within the halls of VA and across the veteran community. We believe this transformational change is necessary to, first, increase accountability. Chairman Arrington, you said it best yourself just last week during a hearing on the VRNE program. We need a quarterback. To build on your analogy, right now there is a strong roster of directors and deputy undersecretaries who are successfully carrying the ball down the field for economic opportunity programs, much like receivers and running backs. But all receivers still need a quarterback, someone to call the plays, read the field, and make adjustments, and to take the tough questions after the game when things do not go as expected. And while we appreciate the new Undersecretary of Benefits being installed just last week, we believe this proposal is still necessary to provide more direct accountability for those programs it would encompass. Second, elevate the power of economic opportunity for veterans. Elevating economic opportunity sends a powerful message that an empowered life is prioritized by VA at the same level of things like health care and burial benefits, instead of simply being part of the bottom-heavy Veterans Benefits Administration. Third, it establishes a more direct counterpart for cross-agency efforts. A myriad of government agencies routinely interact with VA on economic opportunity programs and initiatives. Providing these agencies with an undersecretary to coordinate and champion such cross-agency efforts will lead to greater government efficiency. Fourth, it supports whole health. VA's Whole Health Initiative aims to shift the focus from what's the matter to what matters most to veterans. Economic opportunity programs directly support building on this concept by focusing on things that can help veterans achieve educational, employment, and home ownership goals. But these programs need a stronger champion in the VA structure. A long list of traditional and post-9/11 military and veteran service organizations have supported this concept in the past and continue to do so today. We're eager to work with this Congress and the President to finally make it a reality. SVA also supports H.R. 5649, the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer William Bill Mulder Transition Improvement Act, which would improve the Transition Assistance Program. Important improvements to TAP have been highlighted through participation in roundtables this committee hosted and other convenings over the past year. We are pleased to see a majority of those bold initiatives included in this transformational piece of legislation. Specifically, we applaud the committee for including attention to 1. Transition pathways. This would require the military services to establish a minimum of 3 transition pathways to be used as part of the individualized counseling during TAP. This is an important improvement that will catalyze the success of separating service members and is a distinct shift from the current approach where individuals receive instruction almost exclusively based on rank. 2. Support for veterans and spouses. This bill would reauthorize a pilot program that allowed veterans and spouses to attend the Department of Labor workshop at off-base locations. This is an important recognition that access to the information in TAP seminars after separation for spouses and veterans can help improve the transition process. Next, the importance of community impact. The bill proposes a 5-year pilot program to help community providers fund innovative transition services. These initiatives appropriately recognize the importance of local communities in the transition process, and we applaud the acknowledgement of community-based impact. And finally, the need for greater data. This bill proposes several data collection and report requirements which will provide further clarity on the overall impact of TAP and provide information that can be used to refine the program's effectiveness. We strongly applaud this committee for including each component and look forward to reviewing the information for years to come. On curriculum, this bill would improve and modernize the curriculum and structure of TAP by authorizing a service member to choose one of the 2-day tracks focused on education, vocational training, employment, or entrepreneurship as part of their 5-day training. This is different from the current structure that has a mandated 5-day course with the option to add an additional 2-day track. While we appreciate the mandate of a 2-day track, which do provide tailored information based on a service member's transition plan, we have concerns they would replace instead of supplement the current 5-day curriculum. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on these issues, and thank you for making the success of student veterans and the importance of economic opportunity for all veterans and their families a top priority.
Thank you, Ms. Augustine. Finally, Ms. Burgess, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member O'Rourke, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today as you consider measures to uplift our nation's veterans in their transition from war to successful civilian lives. It's an honor. Veterans are the permanent ambassadors of national service. How we publicly portray veterans relates to how society conceptualizes military service, including what happens to an individual during that service. In all volunteer force, reputation is key to the attractiveness of joining a profession that can end in death or permanent disability. Those who choose to wear the nation's uniform, as well as those who choose not to, are influenced by how well Congress and VA care for veterans' post-service reputations, as for their physical bodies. The types of legislation that Congress passes and the programs and benefits the VA prioritizes powerfully shape the veteran narrative. Crucially, it influences veterans' own perception of their identity and worth in the post-service context. The proposed Vet Op Act reflects how veterans grow their post-service identity in a whole health manner. It recognizes that having a fourth, high-level institutional VA mechanism at Veterans Economic Opportunity and Transition Administration, headed by its own undersecretary, can light the pathway to success for post-service veterans, similarly to how DoD mechanisms involving training, sense of purpose, and a shared community shape young civilians into successive soldiers. A little less than half of the entire military are 25 years old and younger. Developmentally speaking, this is emerging adulthood, a period of rapid development involving key struggles surrounding personal identity. The military offers concrete answers to common existential questions, reinforcing them through experience during this normative period. Positive self-regard cultivated during military service becomes a focal point of the psychological changes marking the period of transition out of the military. Research from Columbia University reveals that veterans experience grief-like symptoms at the loss of their military identity, which in turn augments all the stressors of a life transition when facing the initial instability of civilian life and lacking the order and purpose that characterizes their service. We tend to call this experience of veteran transition stress PTSD, and erroneously believe the majority of all post-9/11 veterans have a mental health disorder. Unfortunately, since funded research at VAs and MTFs prioritize PTSD research, and since most well-intentioned veteran legislation post-9/11 emphasizes mental health disorders, potential employers and veterans themselves are trapped in the inaccurate and harmful broken veteran narrative cycle. Over half of employers believe that veterans don't have successful careers after the military, that veterans don't pursue a college or vocational school degree. 62% believe veterans need to acquire more hard and soft skills. Veterans themselves tend to agree that they need soft skills. Both nearly unanimously agree on the benefit of internship or apprenticeship programs for veterans as they seek to re-enter the civilian workforce. And post-9/11 veterans especially see education as crucial to their continued success. The VA currently has a suite of educational assistance, vocational rehabilitation, employment, and education and career counseling programs, which make accessible tools veterans need to progress from war to work. But these are at the bottom of the totem pole within the Veteran Benefits Administration. The VA's nearly century-old structural design impedes its own ability to help veterans achieve success. Its manufacturing economy outlook, which informs its 1917-based disability model, marks as a perverse incentive against veterans entering the workforce. With VBA's energies directed towards its backlog of its disability claims, its institutional resources are concentrated on the disability system to the unsurprising neglect of its education and economic programs. One small example, if you visit the Office of Employment and Economic Impact website under VBA, it tells you it is no longer available and to look elsewhere. Coincidentally, a majority of veterans report navigating the VA's administrations and benefits is their top challenge in their transition to civilian life. The very VA economic opportunity programs veterans stand most to profit by are operating with the proverbial millstone around their necks. In the 21st century information age, education is key to employment, and employment is the door to a successful transition to civilian life. Education and employment combined give veterans the tool to reforge civilian identities stronger even than their military ones. The psychic rewards of work, productivity, and a career cannot be underestimated, which is corroborated by the true veteran narrative. Empirical data shows how veterans with increased levels of education are wealthier, healthier, and more civically engaged than even their civilian peers. Additional research establishes the links between these outcomes, reduced rates of dependence, disability, and criminality. This is the veteran narrative that should predominate. The Vet Op Act can trigger this narrative shift as Congress elevates existing VA economic opportunity and transition assistance programs, shifting them structurally into a fourth VA administration. The goal of such programs should be to enable soldiers to be fully functional members of society, animated by a strong civilian identity. Thank you for the honor of this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess. I'm going to yield 5 minutes to myself to begin the discussion and line of questions. Let's pick up where you left off on this fourth admin bill. I'm loath to tell an executive how to organize and what specific strategies and tactics to deploy. I would focus on results, and I would focus on what success looks like, and then I would measure that, and then we would hold them accountable as the governing committee over the VA administration. I think that's the way this ought to work, but I must say, I'm very concerned with the lack of continuity in political leadership at the VA. I bring this up repeatedly. I don't know, part of the problem may be the Senate is not doing their job to move these things through for our president. I think every president, whether you're Republican or Democrat, they ought to have their folks in place so that they can be judged at the end of their term whether they fulfilled their commitments and promises. But you can not very easily hold people accountable when you're not allowing them to put their teams in place. Maybe there are other factors, but I know it's a big gap in the accountability chain up to this governing board. And so this is intriguing to me, this fourth admin position, because I think the political leadership is the gap. If they're not in place, if there's not continuity, then it's very difficult for us. We can call the career folks up and we can beat on them when we're unhappy with some failure in the system, and there's all too often that's what's happening. For example, with Voc Rehab recently, we had an oversight hearing. And Voc Rehab and education program is so critically important, as you said, to change the narrative and to empower our veterans. And we know the benefits, they're quantifiable on how much more people make, and the happiness, healthy sort of quality of life improvements are all measurable. But their case managers are still stuck in the 1990s in terms of how they keep records and manage the process. They're using the Big Chief notebook and the number 2 pencil. Literally, they're using paper. And when they implemented a system recently, or recently as a couple years ago, they were trying to build some new fandangled case management system instead of just taking ones off the shelf that are already deployed, even at the VA and working. They wasted $12 million. And so that's an and the people that we called here for the hearing, they weren't part of it because they're just acting as this, or they're temporarily filling this, and you can never, you try to wind your way around the VA to find out who was there and who's accountable. And it is just, it is the most frustrating experience. And it's repeated almost at every hearing, oversight hearing that I'm involved in. And I'm sick of it. I do think for accountability purposes, you already have the VBA, the National Cemetery Administration, the VHA already have an undersecretary, political leadership, but there's this void on the VRNE. So it seems to me to complete this scope of responsibility and authority at the political level, we ought to have that undersecretary created. It's not just for accountability, although that would be top of mind for me because of the waste, is support. I'm not sure that not having a seat at the table with the secretary and not being able to articulate to the secretary the needs and the opportunities doesn't leave the VRNE the stepchild of the VA, and I'm concerned about that. We have 3 people, Ms. Devlin, with all due respect, and I know you're representing your agency's views, not your own personal, but why wouldn't this be a good thing? A budget neutral, we're spending billions upon billions more every year to support our veterans. Why not have more control, more oversight, more accountability, and more support for an important area? Maybe the longest question in the history of the VA committee. But Ms. Devlin, please explain why that doesn't make sense to our 3 other panelists and everybody else on this committee.
Chairman Arrington, thank you so much for that question. I'll make a couple of comments. First of all, Dr. Paul Lawrence has, as you indicated, has come on board as our Undersecretary for Benefits. And one of his top priorities, you heard his testimony probably about his 3 priorities, and one of them is to ensure that we shape the way we deliver benefits to best honor the service that our men and women have served our country. And he has prioritized these economic opportunity business lines. In fact, he and I watched the VRNE hearing last week together and made notes on some of the issues that came up. He's meeting with the Chief Information Officer, the person that's acting over IT, very immediately. He's meeting with all of the directors over the business lines. He's meeting, in fact, today with the Education Service Director to get an update on the Colmary Act, because one of his main concerns coming in is, are we on track with implementing the Colmary Act? Are there any obstacles? Are there any hurdles that we need to overcome? Because he will be personally engaged in helping with that. With respect to voc rehab and employment, we've dug in and tried to understand better what the issues have been with being able to report accountability in that program. We do actually have accountability measures in the VRNE program. I can report to you what those measures are and how we're doing, should you be interested in that. But as we look at the organizational transformation that VA has been undertaking under this administration, we're looking to actually delayer and reduce the amount of bureaucracy, not increase the amount of bureaucracy. And while it is a flat number that is proposed in this, in the sense that we would not grow VA, but we would use the same numbers, you have infrastructure that plays in when you build another Undersecretary for Benefits and all that entails. So some of that infrastructure would come from other positions that could have been direct serving positions. And then finally, I would say to you that maybe we need to actually look at the layers of oversight that are in place now. Maybe they're not positioned correctly. Maybe we need to look at this split between the field operational leadership and the business line leadership, and maybe those 2 shouldn't be separate. Maybe that's part of the problem, is that we have that divide in how the program oversight is conducted. So that is one of our priorities that we're looking at, and we don't believe that creating a whole other administration is necessary.
Well, nothing's worked up until now, so I'm skeptical, but I'm out of time, and I want to respect my colleague, Mr. Bilirakis, and recognize him for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, if you want more time.
I'll get it. I promise you. That's the benefit of being the chairman. I'm going to get back to it.
You're the
Thank
chairman,
you.
so all right, no problem. Mr. Kamen, see, I know that the American Legion has indicated their support for the TAP bill, H.R. 5649, but I want to get your perspective and insight on this, again, very important bill. How can we work with DOD to ensure that service members are able to attend the TAP whenever they want throughout their program, their military careers, there's language in the bill that allows this, I understand, but how can we ensure that service members are allowed to attend the classes during their military career, and then also if they want to attend the classes, maybe the same classes over again? So I think that's so very important that they have the flexibility. If you can answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, sir, for that question. And you're right, it is an important issue when it comes to structuring TAP to meet the demands of the service member and not the other way around.
Right.
The biggest challenge, I think, with TAP we see is an edifice that's developing around languages that often references the military life cycle model, and that we need TAP over the course of a life cycle for service members. And while that sounds nice, it is very tough to imagine how that impacts the ground level soldiers, Marines, and sailors, where in the middle of theater deployments, in the middle of extended training, you will get introduced with TAP. Who's going to do that? Our TAP counselor is going to be going out to the field with them. I have yet to see any integration when it comes to TAP counselors and service members on the ground and on the company level. That being said, the bill does make an important step when it comes to the one-on-one counseling. There is a litany of evidence that suggests that mentorship can be much more critical than just a class. A class is passive learning. Mentorship, you're engaging. So by meeting with the TAP counselor one-on-one beforehand, they can come to better understanding about what right path they want to take, and if they have any concerns or questions, that can be answered and before going into TAP. I've often referenced a story about a Marine who told me that he was a company commander, one of his Marines wanted to go to college, and he was really excited. He was going to get out in a month, and the problem was it was February, and his commander asked him, well, have you applied? Because usually the deadlines are around November or December. And the Marine's face turned white as a ghost because he had no idea. And that's how service members can end up going to unscrupulous institutions who say, oh, we'll enroll you. Don't worry about that. We have a rolling admission at our for-profit school. And that makes it that much more important, we see from the counseling side, that they can get that more in advance so they can structure their separation plan far in advance before that TAP class already happens.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Augustine, please share with us why it is important that we improve service members' transition from active duty to civilian life, and how the chairman's TAP bill, again, H.R. 5649, which I strongly support, proposes key changes that will positively impact overall outcomes for individuals separating from the military. If you can go into some detail, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. A successful transition is important for a number of reasons, the most important being that veterans are the ambassadors of the all-volunteer force, and if we successfully transition veterans into schools, into employment, into whatever their pathways after their military service may be, we now have empowered individuals who are speaking to the benefits of service that can have prolonged impacts on the positive ability to continue sustaining the all-volunteer force. It fulfills our obligation to those who serve to make sure that because of their service, we afford them the opportunity for an education, employment pathways that speak to the level of importance of their service. Those two are probably the most important reasons why we support the TAP bill and want to see the TAP program continue to be strengthened and improved.
Okay, very good. And I wouldn't mind meeting with you in my office to get some further suggestions on how we can improve it, because this is something that's very important to me and to my constituents, and I have a Veterans Advisory group, and we've been working on this issue for the last year. So please don't hesitate to come and see me, please.
I will do, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bilirakis, and I appreciate all the groundwork that you laid in advance of this TAP reform legislation. It's made it all the more efficient to move through the process to get to where it is today. I'm very proud of it, because I really, it's very much a sort of West Texas principle that, you wouldn't ask something from somebody, especially something so great as to be willing to sacrifice your life on the front end and make sure that they had the support to do what you're asking them on the front end, and then just kind of when you've gotten what you want out of them, what you needed out of them, you just kind of thanks and send them off along their way. I think That's not just a West Texas principle. That's not American. That's just, as my B-Law professor used to say at Texas Tech, that ain't right. The ain't right meter is way over here on that one. And so let's, and I'm not under any illusion that this is the silver bullet, that will solve all the problems that our veterans face when they return home with respect to incarceration and unemployment and suicide and addiction. But to get at those things earlier, to have a profile after an assessment that's meaningful, it's real assessment, and we do it again early enough that we can begin to wrap around the services and support that they need. Not a one-size-fits-all, but as we've attempted to do, have individualized plans and identify those who are the highest risk. We know what presents as the highest risk of veterans or service members transitioning. Let's get ahead of it. Let's care as much about them at that transition stage as we do when we're transitioning them as warriors, from citizen to warrior, now from warrior to citizen, and leverage all those awesome new skills and training that they have, so they'll be even better than they would have been had they not had that experience in their communities and in the workforce. So obviously, it's taken me a year, Mr. Bilirakis, but I've finally found the thing that I think will make the greatest difference in my tenure. If I'm chair for just one Congress, this is that thing. I think the post 9/11 GI Bill is working wonderfully. I mean, we can always make tweaks to it, but I mean, the home loan program, I mean, it works well. This needed vast improvement. I think we've created some vast or structural transformational improvements. Now, I understand, Ms. Devlin, and I really enjoyed working with you, by the way. That's how I softened you up before I hit you with this question. And sincerely, I did. I mean, we did this together, did we not? We got everybody around the table. We got all the stakeholders, and we walked through this together. We didn't do this top down to anybody. We did it with you and the Labor Department and Defense, et cetera. But you have said in your testimony that the VA has already been working on these improvements that I've mentioned, and there are others. How long have you been working on that? I must say, one of the oft-quoted responses to this committee since I've been here is, we're working on it, we're studying it, we're assessing it. And I have very little confidence, not because of you, but because of the bureaucracy over there, that study and assessment and we're working on it ever results in any tangible action. Well, I want action. Veterans want action. They need action. So tell me, how long have you been working on this, and do you really think you're going to do anything unless we codify this and memorialize some of the things you're doing in this piece of legislation?
Thank you. I'm happy to address your question. This has been years in the making. As you know, I've been involved in the Transition Assistance Program for just a little over a year. And one of the things that I discovered coming into my new role a little over a year ago was that while we were talking about a military life cycle, VA had actually not implemented any military life cycle modules yet. And while we were talking about doing a post-transition survey of veterans, we had not actually implemented a survey. So one of my main priorities when I got into that job was to carry those things through. I'm happy to report that the survey instrument is ready for deployment pending OMB's approval. It's gone through the 60-day Federal Register notice and the 30-day, it's in the 30-day comment period right now, which ends the end of this month. So subject to OMB's review and approval of the survey, we will be ready to deploy the survey. And that is important because one of the things I realized early on, I talked to veterans, right? Recently transitioned veterans about their problems, their issues, their concerns. But one of the things I realized is when I talked to service members who were approaching transition, they had absolutely no idea what they were about to embark on with their transition. They had no real expectations of what this process was going to be like. So when we revamped our VA portion of the Transition Assistance Program course, we emphasized, here's what the transition means for you, here are the decisions you need to make, the actions you will need to take for a successful transition. And we did that based on feedback that we got anecdotally from service members or veterans. But what we need is real feedback. We need these survey results so that we can actually take a veteran who's recently transitioned and ask them questions such as, what's your current situation with respect to employment, your finances, your family situation, your health, a very holistic view, and also asking them to reflect back. Now, reflect back on your transition program experience. Did those things help you? And if you had to change something, what would you tell us we should change? So we are moving forward on that. On the military life cycle models, we have a program designed to teach the service member about community resources, and that is on target to be ready for deployment to the DoD in collaboration with DoD and DOL by December of this year.
How long has the TAP program been in existence?
In its earliest form, it was in the early 1990s. I believe it was 1991, where it was optional.
Okay.
But in 2011, the VOW Act made it mandatory, and that's really the program that you see today, which was implemented in its full capacity around 2013, 2014, and that's the mandatory 5-day program with the additional tracks that you see today. So it's pretty recent.
So 2011 to 18, several years, and we haven't had an evaluation instrument to say if this is working or not. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know exactly, how much do we spend on TAP exactly? I have that somewhere, but just roughly.
Well, given that it's multiple agencies, I couldn't answer that for you in full.
How much the VA spend on it?
Can I get back to you that
Yeah.
for the record? I don't want
I've
to give you
looked at it.
an accurate number. I don't want to give you a ballpark number and have it be wrong.
Let me just be clear. It's hundreds of millions of
It's
dollars.
multi-million dollar, yes.
Okay? Multi-hundred million
Yes.
dollars that we spend.
It
on
is.
And we've been doing this for several years, and we still don't know. I got to tell you again, it is the bane of my existence on this committee to have programs that feel good, seem right, and if done well, produce higher salaries for people who go through that than who don't, et cetera. But I want to trace it back to whether that program actually had that effect and what part of that program. And I know you do too, but the reason we are going to do this is because we've had several years to have such an instrument. I'm not blaming you. I know you just got there, so this is about the VA, but the reason why I'm so strong about making these changes now is because with my experience, I don't know if you're going to be there next year. And if they've been doing this for several years, and if people, come in and out of these jobs because I think continuity is a real problem, then I'm going to plow forward with you and your input. And there's a lot of room for making necessary decisions where there's great latitude by you and your colleagues at the VA. So we frame it, but you're going to have to build it, and we're going to have to count on you guys and trust y'all to build it well. But I just want to be clear, I've only been here for a year, and I've got earlier transition, and I want you to make note of this because I want your response. Earlier transition engagement with the veteran, okay? Earlier engagement in the process. Not just 90 days out, let's assess them, and let's include a more comprehensive assessment. Maybe the problem isn't the skill sets, maybe they have PTSD, maybe they have something in the way of mental health that has to be addressed before they can ever get there. So it doesn't matter how much, they could get a PhD, it won't matter. They could have the greatest training, it won't matter. So let's have a more comprehensive assessment. Let's have individualized plans. Let's have a better curricula for them and more focused and targeted on their specific needs. Let's connect them to the community, to community organizations that do a great job, not only giving them the support and services, but just because they're on ground zero with them at home. And that's a community that they can connect with. There's great psychological, not just practical advantages, and then measure the results as you talked about with that evaluation. Is there anything that I just articulated in the way of the framework for this TAP reform that you disagree with? I mean, in principle.
No, sir. In principle, I agree with everything that you've said. As a rehabilitation counselor by training, early intervention is critical. Individualized care and planning is critical to the individual. A comprehensive approach to a holistic life transition is very critical. Those
Well,
in principle,
thank
yes,
you.
all those things are correct.
Well, I must say, we wouldn't have come up with this without your input, and I want to make note of that. But I also want to make note that it's been several years. I've been here a year, and we're ready to take action on this. Again, that's not because of me, but it's because I'm not going to wait and study this more. And the veterans don't want to wait. They deserve better, and I do appreciate all your help. Now, Mr. Kamen, why don't you comment on TAP? I mean, we've included veterans organizations in this. How do you rank TAP as a way to get at some of these challenges that our veterans face when they come back? And has it been working well? Do you think we need to reform it like we're reforming it? What are we missing? What would you like to reiterate or emphasize that you've heard today?
Well, I think there are two things that kind of stand out to me on TAP that I'd look at for future changes or maybe stuff to consider moving forward. Number one is the influence of IT and high tech on this and where that could fit in with a greater system. When we've brought up the idea of making TAP online, there's a right way and an absolutely wrong way. And I feel like the trend now is towards the wrong way, which is a module online, where you put your CAC card in your computer and tap your course the way you would do with e-learning, and then you're done, and then it's gone. And the second way is putting it into your hands, a push-to-tap option that could meet. So when it does hit you that, oh no, this is coming up, what am I going to do for my resume? That tap is right at your fingertips. And I think that the proper investment of that is going to make a long-term difference, because ultimately we have a very short ceiling when it comes to TAP, where we can count on the majority of people attending that class to maybe not be there entirely for their attention span because they have other things on their mind. That's always been the trend in TAP. So we work to hone that like you would a diamond to make sure it's as perfect as possible, because we know that they're not going to be fully engaged, and finding ways to draw that out is important. The other thing I'd say is that one of the areas that I think has been missing on TAP is there's the stress that comes in transition for financial and for economic opportunity, but there's also a little bit of a stress on the soul itself, where you lose your sense of purpose. And what am I going to do afterwards? I'm not feeling the sense of value that I was when I was in charge of a squad or a team. And rediscovering that is a crucial part of every single veteran's transition. And I think the best way that TAP can incorporate that is with VSOs, to let them know, welcome home, you're not alone, and re-engaging them in the community through peer-to-peer mentorship, the way that Legion posts do, the way that SVA chapters do, is a critical part of this for them to go into this civilian world and rediscover their sense of purpose and community engagement.
That's very well said, and Ms. Devon, we've talked about that last point. I think that's a great point. So let's keep working to make improvements, and the ink isn't dry. I'm open. I just want to make it as effective and meaningful as we can, and then we'll keep hammering away as we implement the evaluation. We'll actually know what parts are working and what, by listening to the customer, right? Not because I have the great idea or because you do. It's because the customer will tell us, and that customer is our veteran. Ms. Augustine, any comments about TAP and how we can, are we on the mark here? Are we missing something we should include?
Yes, sir. I'll point to three things. First being SVA views TAP as the capstone of your transition experience, not the starting point. So to your point about we should be transitioning earlier or allowing for that transition to start earlier is something that we wholeheartedly agree with. The second being that sort of good business practices to double down on your successes. And right now we're seeing veterans in higher education succeeding greatly. We're also seeing employment numbers continue to drop for veterans. So doubling down on the work of TAP and making sure that we're giving the equipment and the curriculum and the tools that TAP needs to continue driving that success is vitally important to not just veterans, but to the American economy. And then the third, I would like to build on what my colleague was saying about well-being, being an often overlooked aspect of TAP that I think we as a larger community have started to examine and really focus on what we can do to build that. And I think that in this bill, the commitment to grow a connection with community programs is a solid solution to that answer. So thank you for providing this bill. We look forward to working with you on it as well.
You know, you mentioned something, and so did Mr. Kamen, about these veterans. You know, Bill Mulder, whose namesake that we've honored here with this reform, is a guy I went to high school with. I know this is probably not politically correct, but we used to say he was such a stud. I mean, he played football. He was tough, and he was fun, and he was beloved by all. He was kind of like almost a hero even at that stage. I mean, you just knew he was going to do something great. And when I found out he was a Navy SEAL, I thought, my God, America's safer today because Bill Mulder is protecting us. And I thought, boy, if Navy SEALs are made up of a bunch of Bill Mulders, I pity the enemy on the other side. I was very blessed to talk to him as I was transitioning into my role, in my new role, and as a member of Congress. And because I was trying to connect with another Navy SEAL, Scott Taylor, who is my colleague and a new member. And Bill was so gracious to connect me. But you know, he was on his way out. And this is what he was, it seemed like what he was born, certainly trained to do, and he did it well. And according to his colleagues and to all the ways he was honored in the military and decorated as such, he did it as well as anybody's ever done it. And then he was thinking about coming back into civilian life because he was forced to think about those things. And it just, I just couldn't imagine, but I could sense, you know, what does a guy do who is a warrior, who does that for his entire career and is a leader among the warriors, and then he's plopped back into just the everyday life of a civilian. That's just really difficult. And again, whether it's the physical wear and tear or the mental and emotional, you just can't stick them back in like that without some of the things that we're trying to do. So I don't know why I tell you that, except that, you know, he's on my mind, and I pray that this is a big step to helping Bill Mulders out there who are in that transition phase. Anything, Ms. Burgess, you want to comment on? I know your focus has been more on that fourth admin. I think you get programs that we make the right investment in, that we define success and measure it, and then put accountability. Now you might have a shot at actually serving the customer. What are your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely believe so. I also think that the fourth administration, along with the TAPS legislation, are actually two parts of a really excellent, really powerful punch, because they're showing that there is this way towards transition, and then it will help actually focus on those transition elements. Also, to just the point of the identity, this is the question I think everyone has been circling around today, and the question of identity is just as powerful and needing to be formed once you go out of the service as when you enter. And civil society itself is weaker today. You know, the Robert Putnams of the world have all the information on that. And so we do need to enforce and almost put a little bit more into the path of veterans, all of the different elements that they can take, so that if it's like a St. Lawrence Seaway, we're not emptying the water in the locks, we're actually filling the water so that the ships can go forward. So thank you very much.
Can you imagine, and we won't ever get there probably, but can you imagine if we spent the time and resources that we do on the front end training them on the back end to sort of refocus them? Can you imagine what our society would be with these returning warriors who are acclimated and prepared to reintegrate, and what they would contribute to young people in their communities, in their churches, at schools? Can you even, I mean, that's pretty powerful to me. I hope we get it right. I think we have gotten a lot right. Let's keep working together, and let's keep perfecting it even beyond the implementation, okay? Ms. Devlin, again, I want to thank you for your candor and your contribution to the process, along with your other colleagues at the VA, DOL, and Defense. And let's go forth and do really good things for our veterans. How about it? Okay, I think I have to read something here. Can I just skip to this? Okay. I ask unanimous consent that written statements from the U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Justice, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors and Paralyzed Veterans of America be submitted into the hearing record without objection, so ordered. Finally, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on any of the bills under consideration this morning without objection, so ordered. I hope you all have a nice Memorial Day, and we are adjourned.